Story 1. I didn't believe in urban legends until I heard the subway whisperer myself. I'm Derek, born and raised in Queens, New York. Been taking the subway since I was a kid, so I know all the usual noises. The screeching brakes, the announcements, the buskers. But what I heard that night was something else entirely. It was around 1 a.m. last December. I was coming home from a late shift at the hospital where I work as an orderly. The platform at 36th Street Station was nearly empty. Just me and this older woman clutching her purse like someone might snatch it. The train was taking forever, so I put in my earbuds and zoned out. That's when I felt it. This weird pressure change, like when you're in an elevator dropping too fast. My ears popped, and suddenly my music sounded different, muffled. Then I heard it, a voice whispering directly into my ear. "Stand back!" I yanked out my earbuds, spinning around. Nobody was there. The old woman was still 20 feet away, not even looking at me. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed through the station. The woman glanced up, frowning, then went back to her phone. I figured I was just tired, hallucinating from exhaustion. I'd pulled a double shift after all. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, like someone was standing right behind me. "Stand back now!" The voice had this quality, hard to describe. Like it was coming through an old radio with terrible reception. Static-filled but unmistakably urgent. My heart was pounding as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The old woman noticed and took a few steps toward me. "You okay, honey?" she asked, concerned. Before I could answer, there was this horrible screeching sound from the tunnel, much louder than normal. Then a massive chunk of concrete, must have been at least 50 pounds, crashed down exactly where I had been standing moments before. The woman screamed. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the debris. "Holy shit," I whispered. "You're lucky," the woman said, clutching her chest. "You moved just in time." I nodded, unable to speak. Because how could I explain what had happened? That some invisible person had warned me? After giving statements to the MTA workers who showed up, I took a different train home. Couldn't sleep that night, replaying the voice in my head. The next day I mentioned it to my coworker Miguel, who's lived in New York his whole life. "Oh shit, you heard the subway whisperer," he said, eyes widening. "My cousin heard it once, back in 2018. Told him to wait for the next one. He was pissed about being late for work, but he stayed put. The train that came, derailed between stations. 3 people died." "What the hell is it?" I asked. Miguel shrugged. "Nobody knows. Some say it's the ghost of a transit worker who died in the 70s during construction. Others think it's something that's always been down there in the tunnels before the subway was even built. All I know is if you hear a whisper in the subway telling you to do something, you fucking do it." I've taken that same route hundreds of times since then. Never heard the voice again. Story 2. I never believed in those old Malaysian ghost stories until 3 months ago. My name's Adil, and I've been living in this small town outside Kuala Lumpur for almost 2 years now. I work from home as a software developer, which means I'm alone in my house most days. That's important to understand what happened. It was during the rainy season, around 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished a video call with my team and was settling in for dinner when I heard a light knock at my door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 soft taps, barely audible over the rain. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbors don't visit without texting first, and delivery services don't come this late. "Who is it?" I called out, but there was no answer. The knocking came again, a bit louder this time. I went to the door and peeked through the peephole. Standing outside was an elderly woman hunched against the rain. She wore a traditional baju kurung that had seen better days and a worn-out headscarf. What caught my attention was the plastic basket she carried, covered with a damp cloth. Against my better judgment, I opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" She looked up, and something about her eyes made me take a step back. They seemed wrong somehow. Too dark, too empty. "Malam anak," she said in a raspy voice. "Machi jual kropa. Mahubali?" "Good evening, child. Auntie is selling crackers. Would you like to buy?" The hairs on my neck stood up. It was raining heavily, and this old woman was going door to door selling crackers at night. My grandmother's warnings about not entertaining strangers after dark came rushing back to me. "No, thank you," I replied, moving to close the door. "It's late." Her hands shot out with surprising speed, preventing the door from closing. Her strength was unnatural for someone her age and size. "Belly saja sikit," she insisted. "Just buy a little." "I'm sorry, I don't need any," I said more firmly, pushing against the door. Her expression changed instantly. The polite smile vanished, replaced by something that made my blood run cold. Her lips stretched too wide, revealing yellow teeth. "Kalau tak mau beli, makcik tinggalkan sesuatu untuk kamu. If you don't want to buy, Auntie will leave something for you." With that, she removed the cloth from her basket. I expected to see packets of keropok, but instead there was nothing. Just an empty basket. But she reached in anyway and made a motion like she was releasing something into my house. I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately. My heart was pounding. I told myself I was being stupid, that she was just a harmless old woman trying to make some money. Maybe she was confused or not entirely there mentally. That's what I kept telling myself until I heard the giggling. It started softly, coming from my kitchen. A feminine giggle that sounded like a young woman. But I lived alone. "Hello," I called out, grabbing a knife from my dining table. "Who's there?" The giggling stopped. Then came the smell, a sickeningly sweet floral scent mixed with something rotting. It was overpowering, making my eyes water. I backed away toward the front door, planning to run outside, but stopped when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Something darted across the hallway, a flash of white and black, too fast to be human. Then I heard breathing right behind me. I spun around and saw nothing, but the breathing continued right in my ear, inhaling, exhaling. I could feel the cold breath on my neck. "Awat tak mau beli keropok makcik?" "You didn't want to buy Auntie's crackers." The voice was different from the old woman's. Younger, sharper, almost playful, but with a menacing edge. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door, fumbling with my phone to call my neighbor, Pak Hamid. He's an older man who's lived in this area his whole life. He answered on the third ring. "A deal? Ada Appa. What's wrong?" "There's someone in my house," I whispered. "An old woman came selling keropok and..." He cut me off immediately. "Makcik keropok?" His voice had changed, become urgent. "Adil, dengar baik-baik. Jangan tutup telepon. Listen carefully. Don't hang up." As he spoke, I heard a scratching sound on my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, like long fingernails dragging across the wood. "Recite the Ayatul Kursi now," Pak Hamid instructed. "I'm coming over. Keep reciting it." I'm not particularly religious, but in that moment, I remembered the prayer my mother taught me as a child. I began reciting, my voice shaky at first, then stronger. The scratching stopped. The sweet, rotting smell faded. Pak Hamid arrived 15 minutes later with 2 other men from the neighborhood. They walked through my house, reciting prayers in each room. They burned something that filled the house with a strong, cleansing scent. Later, as we sat in my living room, Pak Hamid explained, "Makcik keropok isn't a person, Adil. It's a vessel. What she releases is a pontianak, the spirit of a woman who died during childbirth. They attach themselves to lone men." "But why? Why come to my house?" He looked at me gravely. "They're drawn to places where they can feed on fear. You're alone here. Perfect target." I stayed with Pak Hamid that night. When I returned home the next day, everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I've moved since then. I don't live alone anymore. And I never ever ignore the warnings my grandmother gave me about strangers at night. And if you're ever in Malaysia and hear a knock on your door after dark, someone selling keropok, my advice is simple. Don't answer. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts until I moved to Millbrook. The rent was cheap, the neighbors kept to themselves, and I had a decent view of the mountains from my bedroom window. What nobody told me was why the land across from my subdivision stayed empty all these years. I was grabbing beers with my neighbor Rick one night when he finally filled me in. "That empty lot used to be Greenvale Psychiatric Hospital," he said, lowering his voice even though we were the only ones at the bar. "Closed down in '89 after some journalist exposed what was happening there. Electroshock therapy without anesthesia, experimental drugs, patient abuse, real nightmarish stuff." "Damn," I replied, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the bar. "What happened to the patients?" Rick took a long sip. The living ones got transferred. The dead ones, they're still there, in an unmarked cemetery on the east side. Just concrete markers with numbers, no names. I'd gone running on those trails dozens of times without knowing I was jogging over graves. Walmart tried to build there back in 2003, Rick continued. Day before construction, a massive landslide took out half the highway. No rain for weeks before, no earthquakes, nothing that could explain it. Engineers said it was soil instability, but everyone around here knows better. The next weekend, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to explore the trails during daylight hours. The area didn't look haunted, just overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. I found the cemetery Rick mentioned, a small clearing with rows of weathered concrete blocks sunk into the earth. Each had only a number etched into it. As I stood there, a gust of wind blew through the trees, making them creak and moan. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in seconds. "They don't like visitors after dark," came a voice behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. An old man stood there leaning on a walking stick, watching me with watery blue eyes. "Jesus, you scared me," I said, my heart racing. "Sorry about that. Name's Walter. Used to work maintenance at Greenvale back in the day." His eyes drifted to the grave markers. "I know some of their names, the ones they tried to make everyone forget." "Why are they buried here and not in a proper cemetery?" I asked. Walter's face hardened. "No family to claim them, or families too ashamed, or too poor. The hospital didn't waste money on headstones for people society wanted to forget." As the sun began to set, Walter suggested we head back. "You don't want to be here after dark," he repeated. "Why? You really think it's haunted?" Walter didn't answer directly. "I was here the night of the landslide, working security for the construction company. I heard voices, hundreds of them, all at once. Then the ground just moved, like something underneath was pushing up." I laughed nervously. "Coincidence, right? Bad soil engineering?" "Engineers found nothing wrong with the soil composition," Walter said flatly. "Nothing that explained why stable ground would suddenly collapse. Walmart gave up after that. So did every other developer who's looked at the land since." That night I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. I found myself at my bedroom window, staring at the dark mass of land where Greenvale once stood. Maybe it was sleep deprivation or my imagination running wild after Walter's stories, but I swore I saw lights moving through the trees, not flashlights, but pale blue orbs floating a few feet off the ground. Without really thinking, I threw on shoes and a jacket and headed outside. The rational part of my brain said I was being stupid, but I had to know. The trails looked different at night. The moonlight cast strange shadows, and every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I followed what I thought was the main path, but quickly realized I was lost. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the temperature kept dropping until I could see my breath. Then I heard them. Whispers, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" The whispers grew louder, but no more intelligible. My phone's flashlight illuminated nothing but trees and dirt. I turned to head back the way I came, but the path had vanished. That's when I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. It wasn't violent, more like standing on a waterbed as someone sits down on the other side. A gentle rise and fall. I froze, afraid any movement might trigger something worse. "I'm sorry," I said to the empty air, not even sure why I was apologizing. "I'm leaving now." The ground stilled. The whispers faded, and suddenly there was the path again, visible in the moonlight as if it had never disappeared. I didn't run. Somehow that felt disrespectful. But I walked as quickly as I could back toward the streetlights of my subdivision. As I reached the edge of the property, I looked back one last time. Standing at the tree line was a figure. Not Walter, not anyone living. It was pale and thin, wearing what looked like hospital pajamas. Even from a distance, I could see it had no face, just smooth, blank skin where features should be. It raised one hand slowly, not in threat, but almost like a goodbye. I blinked and it was gone. I've lived in Millbrook for 3 years now. I still go running during the day, but I stay on the west side trails, far from the cemetery. I never went back at night. Some places carry too much pain to ever be just land again. The people buried there may not have names on their graves, but they made sure they wouldn't be forgotten. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about it. I never told anyone this story because who the hell would believe me? But it happened. I swear on my grandmother's grave it happened. I grew up in Sighișoara, that small medieval town in central Romania that tourists love so much. Yeah, Dracula's birthplace and all that crap. Tourists eat it up. But we locals knew about something way scarier than some fictional vampire. It was summer 1998. I was 13, and back then, parents didn't care where you were as long as you came home before dark. My friend Mihai and I were hanging out near the old Soviet-era apartment blocks on the outskirts of town. You know those ugly gray buildings? Our parents always warned us to stay away from the abandoned one at the end of the complex. That's where they take the children, my mom would say. The black ambulance comes at night. We all heard about the black ambulance. Not a regular ambulance painted black, an actual unmarked van with tinted windows that looked just enough like an ambulance to fool you. They said it was driven by doctors who'd lost their licenses, harvesting organs to sell on the black market. Kids would disappear, then turn up days later in a ditch, with surgical scars and missing kidneys. Sometimes they'd leave money tucked into the victim's pocket. For the funeral, they said. Most kids were terrified, but Mihai and I, we thought it was bullshit parents made up to keep us from wandering too far. Let's check out the abandoned building, Mihai said that evening, punching my shoulder. It's getting dark, I replied. My mom will kill me. Afraid of the black ambulance? He made a spooky noise and wiggled his fingers. Fuck off, I said, but followed him anyway. The building was this half-finished apartment block. Construction had stopped after the revolution in '89. 8 floors of concrete skeleton, no windows, just empty rectangular holes staring out like eye sockets. Graffiti everywhere. We climbed to the second floor, navigating through rubble. Mihai pulled out cigarettes he'd stolen from his dad. We sat near a window opening, smoking and feeling like badasses, watching the sun set over the town. You hear that? Mihai suddenly asked. At first I didn't. Then I caught it. An engine idling somewhere below. We crawled to the edge and looked down. I still remember every detail. A van, dark gray or black, hard to tell in the fading light. No markings, tinted windows. Not quite an ambulance, but similar shape. It had pulled up behind the building where no road existed, just a dirt path. Holy shit, Mihai whispered. The back doors opened. 2 men in dark clothes stepped out. They weren't wearing anything like doctor uniforms, just normal clothes, but they had surgical masks hanging around their necks. One carried what looked like a medical bag. We need to go, I said, my heart hammering so hard I thought they might hear it. Wait, Mihai hissed, grabbing my arm. I want to see. That's when they opened the side door, and I saw something that still haunts me. A small hand dangling out, just visible in the dim light. A child's hand. One of the men pushed it back inside and closed the door. They're coming in, Mihai whispered, panic in his voice. We heard a door somewhere below creak open. Footsteps on concrete. They were inside the building. We ran. No attempt to be quiet, just pure animal panic. Scrambling through the dark, tripping over debris, scraping knees and palms. We found another stairwell on the opposite side and flew down it. Behind us, a voice shouted something. Heavy footsteps following. We burst out of the building and ran all the way home without stopping once, without looking back. I never ran so fast in my life. The next morning I went to Mihai's house, but his mother said he was sick with fever. When I finally saw him 3 days later, he refused to talk about what happened. Just shook his head and said, we were being stupid. There was nothing there. But I know what I saw. And here's the thing that still makes my blood freeze. 2 days after our encounter, local news reported a child missing from a village about 20 kilometers away. 7-year-old boy, and 5 days after that, they found him in a field outside town. The report said he died from unknown causes. His parents were too poor for a proper funeral, but somehow they had enough money. No one asked where it came from. I never went near that building again. Moved away from Sighișoara as soon as I finished school. Now I live in Cluj and I'm 39 with kids of my own. I'm probably too protective of them, never letting them out of my sight. Sometimes I wonder if Mihai really convinced himself nothing happened that night. or if he's just better than me at burying horrible memories. We don't keep in touch anymore. Story 5. I never believed in ghosts until I moved to Oak Ridge. It's a small town about an hour outside of Portland. One of those places where everyone knows everyone's business, and the only excitement comes from high school football games and the occasional town festival. I was 13 when we relocated there because of my dad's job. The local middle school, Oak Ridge Central, was built on what used to be Thornhill Racing Grounds back in the 1940s. Most kids didn't know this history, but my neighbor Mr. Collins was a local history buff who told me everything about the place. "You know that mound behind the field, near those 3 oak trees?" he asked one afternoon while I was helping him with yard work. "That's where they buried that poor horse." I stopped raking leaves. "What horse?" "Back in '47, there was a big race. 2 jockeys were rivals, Thomas Reed and William Black. Reed's horse was the favorite, a beautiful black stallion named Midnight. Story goes that Black couldn't stand the thought of losing to Reed again, so the night before the race, he poisoned Midnight." A chill ran down my spine. "Did the horse die?" "Oh yes," Mr. Collins nodded gravely. "Collapsed right at the starting gate. They say Black was never charged. Not enough evidence, but everyone knew he did it. The racing ground closed down after that. Bad luck, they said." I didn't think much of it until I mentioned it to some kids at school. Jamie, this 8th grader everyone respected, looked at me with wide eyes. "Dude, that's why nobody goes near those trees at recess. The place is haunted." "Buy a horse?" I laughed. "It's not funny," said Ellie, a girl from my math class. "My sister and her friends went there once during lunch. They sat under the trees and closed their eyes for like a minute. She swears they all heard hoofbeats and a horse neighing. When they opened their eyes, there were hoof prints in the dirt that weren't there before." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, right. Don't believe us then," Jamie shrugged, "but don't go there alone." Of course, their warnings only made me curious. The following Monday, I waited until recess was almost over, then slipped away toward the 3 oak trees. It was a cold November day, overcast and gloomy. Perfect weather for ghost hunting, I thought. The mound was about 4 feet high, covered with patchy grass and surrounded by those ancient oaks. From that spot, you could see the whole school field, but nobody could really see you unless they were looking. I sat with my back against the center tree and took a deep breath. Nothing scary so far. Just to test the legend, I closed my eyes. At first, there was nothing but the distant sounds of kids playing and the occasional car passing on the road beyond the school. But after about 30 seconds, the ambient noise seemed to fade. The air grew noticeably colder around me. That's when I heard it. A soft sound at first, like something pawing at dirt. Then a snort, the unmistakable sound of a horse breathing heavily. My heart started hammering in my chest, but I kept my eyes shut tight. It had to be my imagination, right? Just power of suggestion after hearing those stories. The sound of hooves circling the mound became louder, clearer. I could feel vibrations in the ground beneath me. "It's not real," I whispered to myself. Then came a noise that still haunts me, an agonized whinny, the kind of sound an animal makes when it's in terrible pain. It was so close, it felt like it was right next to my ear. My eyes flew open involuntarily. Nothing was there. No horse, no hoof prints, just the empty mound and the 3 oak trees. Relief washed over me, and I laughed nervously at my own foolishness. I stood up, brushing dirt off my jeans, ready to head back to class. That's when I saw it in the corner of my eye, a large, dark shape moving between the trees. I spun around, but it was gone, probably just a shadow from the clouds moving overhead. As I turned to leave, my foot caught on something. I looked down and froze. Half buried in the dirt was a rusted horseshoe. It looked ancient, blackened with age. Something compelled me to reach down and touch it. The moment my fingers made contact, the air around me went ice cold. I heard a short, angry snort right behind me, the sound of a horse exhaling forcefully through its nostrils. Hot breath hit the back of my neck. I didn't look back. I dropped the horseshoe and ran as fast as I could back to the school building, not stopping until I reached the hallway. Later that afternoon, I tried to find the spot again with some friends, wanting to show them the horseshoe, but we couldn't find it anywhere. The mound looked different somehow, the dirt freshly disturbed in places, as though something had been pawing at it. My friends laughed it off, said I was making it up, but Mr. Collins nodded knowingly when I told him. They say midnight still runs that track sometimes, he said quietly. Still looking for justice, I suppose. I never went near those trees again. Story 6. I've lived in Rosewood my entire life, a smallish town about 30 miles outside Springfield. Nothing much happens here. Typical Midwest stuff, you know? But we do have this one story everyone knows. I was the AV kid in high school, which meant I spent a lot of time in weird corners of the building nobody else went to. One Friday in October, Coach Miller asked me to stay late to help record the basketball scrimmage for reviewing plays. I said, sure, extra credit is extra credit. Practice wrapped around 6:30, and the team cleared out pretty quick. Coach handed me the camera memory card and said, just leave it in my office mailbox. I gotta run. Parent-teacher conferences. And just like that, I was alone in the gym. I was packing up the tripod when the lights went out. Complete darkness. I froze. Hello, I called out. Janitor? I'm still in here. No answer. My phone was in my backpack across the gym. I knew the exit was about 30 feet to my right, so I started shuffling that way, dragging the tripod along. That's when I heard it. A soft metallic scraping sound, like someone dragging a ladder across the floor. It was coming from the ceiling. Is someone up there? I called, voice cracking. The scraping stopped. Then I heard a whisper that seemed to come from directly above me. Help me down. My blood turned to ice, and the voice was raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. Everyone in town knows the story of Frank Burgess. In 1973, he fell from the ceiling rafters while installing the gym lights. Broke his neck. Died right there on the court. Some say he still roams the catwalks looking for someone to help him. I'd always thought it was bullshit. You know, just something to scare freshmen. Who's there? I managed to croak out. The scraping started again, moving across the ceiling, stopping right above me. I could feel something watching me in the dark. It's so cold up here, the voice whispered. 50 years. So cold. I heard what sounded like hands sliding down the wall near me, like someone climbing down. That's when I ran. I slammed into a basketball stand, knocking it over with a crash that echoed through the gym. I abandoned the tripod and sprinted toward where I thought the exit was, arms outstretched. My hands hit the door bar, and I burst through into the hallway, which was dimly lit by emergency lights. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot. As I fumbled for my car keys, I glanced back at the school. In the second-floor window above the gym, I saw a silhouette, a man holding what looked like a ladder. He raised his hand slowly, like he was waving goodbye. I never stayed late at school again. And weirdly enough, the footage from that night? Just static after 6:32 p.m. Coach Miller said it was just a technical glitch, but he never asked me to record practice again. Story 7. I grew up in a small coastal town in Maine, where fog rolls in like clockwork, and everyone knows everyone's business. Or at least they think they do. I'm Rachel, 32 now, but this happened when I was in high school. Our town has this old lighthouse about a mile offshore on a tiny island. It's been automated since the 70s, but locals still call it Harmon's Watch, after the last keeper who supposedly went mad there in '69. Official records say he died of a stroke, but that's not what anyone believes. The legend goes that Harmon started hearing voices in the fog. Not just any voices, the cries of drowning sailors. He'd ring the warning bell frantically, even when there were no ships around. The Coast Guard found him dead at the foot of the spiral staircase, his hands still clutching the bell rope, eyes frozen open in terror. After automation, they kept the foghorn but removed the bell. Town historians say it's in a museum somewhere, but nobody can ever say which one. My friends and I were obsessed with Harmon's Watch. During summer break before senior year, my best friend Kayla suggested we take her dad's boat out to the island. It was technically off limits to the public, but everyone visited at least once, sort of a local rite of passage. We should go tonight, she said during lunch at the harbor diner. There's supposed to be fog rolling in around midnight. Perfect timing. You're such a cliche, I laughed, but secretly I was excited. Our other friend Mark was immediately on board, and his girlfriend Beth reluctantly agreed. Just don't tell my mom, Beth warned. She freaks out about that place. Says her uncle heard the bell once when he was fishing nearby. Came home white as a sheet and never went back on the water. The bell that was removed 50 years ago? Mark smirked. Beth shrugged. That's the whole point of the legend, genius. We set out around 11 p.m., the moon occasionally peeking through gathering clouds. The lighthouse beam swept over black water in predictable rotations. I remember feeling strangely calm as we approached, not scared at all. Mark tied the boat to the small, crumbling dock, while Kayla produced 4 beers from her backpack. "Liquid courage," she announced, passing them around. The lighthouse door was locked, but Mark knew about a basement window with a broken latch. We squeezed through one by one, flashlights illuminating decades of dust and cobwebs. "It smells like something died in here," Beth whispered, clutching Mark's arm. "Probably just rats," I said, though the air did have a strange, briny heaviness to it. We explored the ground floor first, just empty rooms with peeling paint and graffiti from previous visitors. Then we headed up the spiral staircase toward the light. That's when the foghorn sounded, making us all jump. "Jesus!" Kayla laughed nervously. "Forgot about that." The automated system was still functional, foghorn blaring its warning every 30 seconds as the thick mist closed in around the island. We reached the top where the massive lens slowly rotated, casting its beam out to sea. Through the glass windows surrounding us, we could see nothing but swirling white. "We're officially fogged in," Mark announced, his voice echoing slightly in the circular room. "Perfect timing for a ghost story," Kayla said, sitting cross-legged on the floor and pointing her flashlight under her chin. "So, Harmon supposedly went crazy because..." Ding. We all froze. Ding. A clear, resonant bell sound floated through the fog. Beth clutched Mark's arm tighter. "Tell me that's just someone's phone." We all pulled out our phones. No service. Ding. "It's coming from outside," I whispered, moving toward one of the windows. The others followed hesitantly. "It's probably just a buoy," Mark said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Ding. "The navigation buoys around here don't sound like that," Kayla said quietly. "That's a handbell." I pressed my face against the cold glass, squinting into the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A faint light on the water, different from our lighthouse beam. More orange, like a lantern. Ding, ding, ding. The ringing became more urgent, faster. "I think I see a boat," I whispered, pointing. "Out there!" The others crowded around me, their breath fogging the glass. "I don't see anything," Beth said. "Wait," Mark said suddenly. "There! Is that a light?" The foghorn blared again, but underneath it now we could hear something else. A voice, or voices, calling out. Indistinct but desperate. Ding, 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 ding. The bell was frantic now, almost like a warning. "We need to go," Beth said, backing away from the window. "Now!" None of us argued. We hurried down the spiral staircase, the bell sound somehow following us, seeming to come from inside the lighthouse now rather than outside. As we reached the ground floor, a tremendous crash shook the building. We all screamed and dropped to the floor. "What the hell was that?" Kayla gasped. "Sounded like it came from the rocks on the north side," Mark said, his face pale in the flashlight beam. The bell had stopped. We stayed frozen for several seconds, listening, nothing but the rhythm of the foghorn. "Let's get out of here," I finally said. We scrambled through the basement window and ran to the dock. The fog was so thick we could barely see each other. Kayla's dad's boat was exactly where we left it. No damage, no sign of anything unusual. We piled in and Mark started the engine, hands shaking as he turned the key. As we pulled away from the island, I looked back at the lighthouse, its beam sweeping uselessly through the dense fog. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the top, near the light. Then the fog swallowed everything, and we motored back to the mainland in silence. The next morning, the harbor was buzzing with news. A fishing boat had gone down on the rocks north of Harmon's Watch during the night. Coast Guard had rescued the crew. All 5 survived, which people called a miracle given the conditions. The captain, a grizzled old-timer named Collins, insisted that if not for the bell, they would have hit the rocks head-on and everyone would have died. The bell had warned them just in time to turn, preventing a direct impact. When officials pointed out there was no bell at the lighthouse, Collins became agitated. "I've been fishing these waters for 40 years, he reportedly said. "I know what I heard. That bell saved our lives." I never told anyone what we experienced that night. Neither did the others. Story 8. I've never told anyone this story before. Not my wife, not my therapist, nobody. I'm a 43-year-old construction manager living in Kolkata now, but I grew up in a small village outside Burdwan. What happened there 20 years ago still gives me nightmares. My grandmother always warned us about Nishi. Never answer if someone calls your name at night, she'd say. Not until you hear them call 3 times. As a modern college student home for summer break, I thought these were just superstitions to keep children from wandering out after dark. It was during a power outage in July, the kind where the air is so thick with humidity you can barely breathe. My parents were visiting relatives, leaving me alone in our old family home. Around 2 a.m., I was trying to sleep despite the heat when I heard it. Rajiv, my name clear as day, coming from outside my window. A woman's voice, soft and familiar. Probably just Sharma auntie from next door, I thought, but it was strange for anyone to be calling at this hour. Rajiv. The second call was slightly louder. Something about the voice bothered me. It sounded almost like my cousin Priya, but she was studying in Delhi. I got up and walked to the window, pushing aside the thin curtain. The moon was hidden behind clouds and the village lane was pitch black. No streetlights in those days. "Hello," I called out, keeping my voice low to avoid waking neighbors. No response. As I was about to return to bed, I heard it again. "Rajiv." This time the voice came from the front door. I felt uneasy but grabbed my flashlight anyway. The electricity was out, and the house was dark except for my small beam of light. The wooden floorboards creaked under my feet as I approached the door. "Who's there?" I called through the closed door. "Rajiv, please help me." The voice was definitely Priya's now. "I've had an accident. Please open the door." My hand was on the latch when I remembered my grandmother's warning. 3 calls. I had heard my name 3 times, but something felt wrong. I hadn't heard from Priya in weeks. Why would she be in our village in the middle of the night? "Priya, what are you doing here? It's the middle of the night. Please, I'm hurt. Open the door." Her voice sounded strained now, almost desperate. I hesitated. "I'm calling your parents first." There was silence. Then, "No need for that, Rajiv. Just open the door. I need to show you something." The hair on my arm stood up. My landline phone was dead because of the power outage, and cell service was non-existent in our village back then. I was completely isolated. "I'll come out in the morning," I said, backing away from the door. The voice changed then. It still had Priya's timbre, but there was something underneath it, like 2 voices speaking at once. "Open the door now!" The door handle began to rattle violently. Then came a pounding so forceful the wooden frame shook. The sound was impossibly loud, like someone was using a battering ram, not fists. "Rajiv, open this door!" The voice wasn't pretending anymore. It wasn't Priya. It wasn't human. It was deep and ragged, almost gurgling, like someone speaking underwater. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly it stopped. Complete silence. I stood frozen in the dark, afraid to move. Then I heard it again, but this time from the back door. "Rajiv." Back to the sweet, sing-song voice. "Come outside. Follow me to the river. I have something wonderful to show you." The river. I remembered the stories. People following voices to water and never returning. I curled up in the corner of the living room, as far from any door or window as possible. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voice continued, circling the house, calling from different windows, different doors, sometimes whispering, sometimes screaming. It cycled through voices of people I knew, my mother, my father, my friends, all begging me to come outside. Dawn came after what felt like eternity. With the first ray of sunlight, the voice ceased. When my parents returned later that day, I tried to tell them what happened. They dismissed it as a nightmare or local troublemakers. I might have believed them, except for what I found while drawing water from our well that morning. At the bottom of our garden pathway, leading toward the river, were wet footprints. Not human footprints. They were elongated, with only 3 toes, and they stopped abruptly halfway down the path, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. 2 weeks later, a teenage boy from the next village was found drowned in the river. His mother said he had gone out in the middle of the night, saying he heard his girlfriend calling him. I left for Kolkata the next day and rarely returned to the village. Some things can't be explained away, and some warnings should be heeded. If you ever hear your name called in the darkness, especially near water, remember, don't answer until the 3rd call. Better yet, don't answer at all. Story 9. I'm Clay, born and raised in Custer County, Montana, right on the edge of northern Cheyenne territory. Everyone around here has heard whispers about the boneyard since they were kids. I was 17 when my buddy Mitch first told me about it during a late-night drive. We were cruising down Route 212, that long, empty stretch that cuts through the reservation. "You know why nobody ever goes to the northeast section past Eagle Creek?" Mitch asked, his face ghostly in the dashboard lights. "Because there's nothing out there," I said. He shook his head. "That's what they want you to think. It's where they dump bodies." I laughed. "Sure, man. I'm serious. My uncle's friend is tribal police. Says there's this spot, a ravine, where the cartels and dealers take people who cross them. Bodies just pile up out there, and nobody can do shit about it because it's in this weird jurisdiction dead zone." "Bullshit," I said. "Think about it. You ever wonder why so many people move away without saying goodbye? Where all those missing persons reports go?" It was just another reservation horror story. We had plenty. Skinwalkers, wendigos, haunted creek beds. The boneyard was just one more legend to scare kids into staying home after dark. One night my phone lit up around 2 a.m. "Mitch. Clay, I need you to pick me up." His voice was shaking. "I'm at that old gas station on 212. When I pulled up, he looked like hell. Bloody nose, torn jacket, eyes wild. "What happened?" I asked as he climbed in. "Just drive," he muttered. "Anywhere. Just get us away from here." We ended up at the 24-hour diner in Lame Deer. Over black coffee, Mitch finally spoke. "I saw it, the boneyard." I sighed. "Man, you're high." "I'm clean. 3 weeks now. Listen to me." His eyes locked onto mine. "I was running packages for Denny Red Hawk. Just small stuff at first, then bigger drops. Tonight was supposed to be my last job before getting out." He took a shaky sip of coffee. "They made me ride along to show the new guy the ropes. But we weren't delivering anything. We drove out past Eagle Creek, took this dirt road I'd never seen before. There's a place out there, Clay, a ravine, deep, with a flat bottom. So, they marched this guy out of the trunk, some supplier who'd been skimming. They already beat him half to death. And then, Mitch's hands were trembling so bad he spilled coffee on the table. They weren't the first ones there that night. There were other remains, not just fresh ones. Some were just bones, scattered everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe more." I felt cold despite the diner's heat. "Did they see you watching?" "Number, I stayed in the car like they told me. But when we got back, I told Denny I was done. He didn't like that. Hence, ... He gestured at his bloodied face. "You need to go to the police," I said. Mitch laughed, a hollow sound. "With what? My word against Red Hawks? Besides that place, it's in this weird spot. State cops can't touch it because it's reservation land. Tribal police won't go near it because it borders private ranch property. The FBI doesn't care unless you can prove it's a serial killer or something." I wanted to believe it was just another drug-fueled story, but I'd never seen Mitch look so terrified. A week later, Mitch disappeared. His mom called me, frantic. Nobody had seen him in 3 days. I filed a missing persons report, but the sheriff just gave me this look, like he'd seen this 100 times before. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. Cemetery Road, mile marker 16, midnight. "Come alone if you want answers about Mitch." Everything in me said not to go, but this was my oldest friend. The spot was a pull-out near an abandoned cattle guard. As I killed my headlights, another pair flashed twice from down an unmarked dirt track. I followed on foot, using my phone's flashlight. A figure stood by a beaten-up truck about a quarter-mile in. As I got closer, I recognized Kevin Two Bulls, Mitch's cousin who worked maintenance for the tribal council. "You shouldn't be here," Kevin said, "but Mitch told me if anything happened to him, I should show you." "Show me what?" Kevin pointed to his truck bed. "Get in. Keep your head down." We drove for maybe 20 minutes, winding deeper into reservation land I'd never seen. The truck finally stopped on a ridge overlooking a vast darkness. "There." Kevin handed me a pair of night vision binoculars. "Look down there." Through the green haze, I saw a deep ravine cutting through the landscape. A pickup truck was parked at its edge, headlights illuminating the scene below. 3 men were dragging something heavy from the truck bed. A body, limp and wrapped in plastic. "Jesus," I whispered. "They've been using this place for at least 30 years, Kevin said quietly. "Cartel people, dealers, anyone who needs problems to disappear. Nobody has jurisdiction. Nobody investigates. Is Mitch down there?" I could barely form the words. Kevin took the binoculars back. "I don't know, but he knew too much, and he was trying to get out. You do the math." As we watched, the men unwrapped the body and rolled it down the embankment. One of them shone a flashlight down after it. In that brief illumination, I saw what Mitch had described. The floor of the ravine littered with shapes, lumps of clothing, scattered white objects catching the light. "Take me back," I said, suddenly unable to breathe. "Now!" As Kevin started the engine, one of the men down below turned and seemed to look directly up at our position. He raised his arm, pointing. "Shit!" Kevin floored it, throwing me against the seat. "They saw us!" We tore back through the darkness, headlights off, bouncing violently over the rough terrain. Behind us, I could see lights giving chase. "What about Mitch?" I yelled over the engine's roar. "Mitch is gone," Kevin shouted back. "And if we don't make it to the main road, we'll be joining him." I never reported what I saw that night. Neither did Kevin. We both knew better. 2 weeks later, Kevin's house burned down with him inside. "Electrical fire," they said. I left Montana the next day. Haven't been back since. Story 10. I never believed in the night marchers until last summer. My name's Kai, and I've lived on the Big Island my whole life. 32 years of locals telling me to respect the old ways, to never mess with sacred ground, to stay inside on certain nights when the moon hangs just right in the sky. I always nodded politely, but inside I was rolling my eyes. Ghost stories for tourists, that's all I thought they were. My buddy Liam and I were doing some night fishing at this secluded beach on the Kahala coast. It's not exactly legal to fish there after sunset, but the spot's incredible and hardly anyone knows about it. We'd been there maybe 2 hours just shooting the shit, drinking a few beers, when the air suddenly changed. "You feel that?" Liam whispered, looking up from his line. I was about to tell him to quit being dramatic when I noticed it too. The breeze had died completely. The waves had calmed to nothing more than gentle laps against the shore. Even the constant chirping of insects had gone silent. "Probably just a weather thing," I muttered. But there was this pressure building, like right before a massive thunderstorm. Liam grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Dude, what day is it?" "Thursday? No, Friday morning, technically. It's the 27th. Shit. My grandma always said the Huaca Ipo march on the 27th of this month." I yanked my arm away. "Come on, man, don't start with that night marchers crap." That's when we heard it. Faint at first, like maybe it was coming from a car radio somewhere distant. Drums, slow, steady, rhythmic, and voices chanting in Hawaiian, words I couldn't understand but somehow felt in my bones. "We need to go. Now." Liam was already gathering his gear. "It's probably just some cultural group practicing," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "At 2 a.m.? In the middle of nowhere? Listen to me, Kai. If it's them, we need to get down. Face to the ground. Don't look at them." I was about to argue when I saw them, torches in the distance, moving along the ridge about half a mile away. They shouldn't have been visible from our angle, but somehow they were, bobbing in a straight line through terrain I knew for a fact was impassable. "This is ridiculous," I said, but I wasn't moving. My feet felt rooted to the sand. The drums grew louder, the chanting clearer. And then, I still get chills thinking about it. I could see them. They weren't walking on the ridge anymore. Somehow they were on the beach, maybe 200 yards away. Torch flames casting unnatural light across ancient war helmets, spears glinting, their bodies semi-transparent, but somehow more real than anything I'd ever seen. I counted 14 of them, moving in perfect unison, their feet not quite touching the sand. "Get down," Liam hissed, already flat on his stomach, face pressed into the sand. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. It was like my whole body had locked up. "Kai, for fuck's sake, get down!" The lead warrior suddenly stopped. The entire procession halted in perfect synchronization. And then slowly, deliberately, the leader turned his head toward me. I've never felt anything like that moment. It wasn't just fear. It was like every cell in my body recognized something ancient and powerful and utterly indifferent to my existence. His eyes weren't eyes at all, just empty sockets with a faint red glow deep within them. He raised his spear and pointed it directly at me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I don't know why. "I'm sorry." Liam was frantically pulling at my ankle, trying to drag me down. "Don't look at them! Show respect!" Finally, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the sand and pressed my face down, eyes squeezed shut. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The drumming stopped. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was worse somehow. I don't know how long we lay there. Minutes? Hours? Every muscle in my body was cramping, but I didn't dare move. Eventually, Liam whispered, "I think they're gone." Slowly, I lifted my head. The beach was empty. No torches, no warriors, no footprints in the sand where they had been. The night was alive again with insects and gentle waves. "Did you?" I started. "Don't," Liam cut me off. "Just don't, okay? We're leaving. Now." We packed up in silence and practically ran to my truck. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. What was there to say? We'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist in the rational world I'd built for myself. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it had been some kind of mass hallucination, maybe from some weird algae bloom or gas pocket that had messed with our heads. Then Liam called. "Check your back," was all he said. I went to the bathroom mirror and twisted around. There, just below my right shoulder blade, was a perfect mark, like a burn or a brand, in the shape of a spearhead. I haven't been night fishing since. I haven't gone anywhere near that beach. And when the 27th of the month comes around, I stay home, doors locked, shades drawn. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.